Would you take a 50% cut in pay to add to your personal job satisfaction? Do you have a vision clear enough to pour your time, energy, and talents into making it a reality? Shawn Dunning has spent over 25 years pursuing his passion for collaboration and problem solving and toward his vision of a world that works for everyone. Hi, I'm Laura Hansen Breksa, and this is my podcast, Intent on Purpose, where I help you invest your time, energy, and talents where they belong. And Shawn is an example to follow. Previously, the Global Director of Leadership and Training for the international nonprofit Search for Common Ground and CEO for the corporate leadership development firm Adventure Associates Incorporated, Shawn is now the United States South Pole Station team trainer. In his spare time, he runs for local office in Richmond, California to bring collaborative leadership into local politics. Shawn's work and passion has taken him to 49 states and 60 countries, and he's proud to be raising two fierce daughters. Here's part of my 2025 conversation with Shawn Dunning. So I'd like you to talk about how you knew this path was right for you. And then I want you to tell me more about this job as United States South Pole Station team trainer, because it sounds like a cold job that brings all the warm feelings. So please take me on that journey.
I think if I were to go back to a point where that started, it's probably my junior or senior year in high school when I was in math class one day and there was a knock at the door and someone came in and gave a note to the teacher. And the teacher looked at the note and looked up at me and said, "Shawn, go to the office, go to the principal's office." And everyone kind of snickered. They figured I was in trouble.
Good.
So I get my bag and I go out the door. I go to the principal's office and I go in. The secretary waves me through, says, go to the back. I get to the principal's office and the principal's just like, at the end of his rope, he's like, "Oh, thank God, Shawn, they're all yours." Two kids had just gotten in a fist fight, and the principal had summoned me to mediate between them. Now, this was not an officially sanctioned thing, but I guess suffice it to say that my desire to help people get along more effectively somehow showed up. I mean, I was a peer counselor, and so there was some kind of, title there, some role, but the idea of pulling me out of class to mediate between students was not really an official thing. And, I tend to think of that as kind of the beginning of my career in peace building and conflict resolution. And when I went off to college initially in mechanical engineering, of all things,
Really?
problem solving. Yeah, but it didn't feed my soul, the way people problem solving does. It only took, less than a year at Cal Poly to switch from engineering into communication and psychology. And I'm so glad I did. And, and then after college, I traveled the world for a year in this international group where, I traveled with a cast of 130 people from 25 countries, and we put on a Broadway style show, and we did community service, and we lived with host families and really got a taste of the world. And it was then that I decided, okay, I definitely want to go into conflict resolution as a career, international conflict resolution. And I applied for the best school in the world that I could find. It was at the time known as ICAR, the Institute for Conflict Analysis and Resolution at George Mason University in Fairfax, Virginia. I applied and I moved. And I arrived in Virginia and I was not accepted. But that didn't stop me. I ended up getting an internship at Search for Common Ground, who I ended up having a great career with later. I waited tables, I substitute taught, and over that year of establishing residency, it actually worked out well because when I did get accepted a year later, then I paid in-state tuition. I think I can say that now without getting in trouble. So sure enough, I went to grad school, got a master's in conflict analysis and resolution. And at the same time, I started doing a lot of corporate consulting with a company called Adventure Associates, with whom I later became a director and COO before ultimately starting my own business and just being an independent consultant. But so I've been very, very fortunate to be able to live on purpose, to, and I've made decisions where I had to take, a 50% pay cut to move across the country to join Search for Common Ground. But it was totally worth it because it was on purpose for me. And I have to pinch myself. I've been able to actually do conflict resolution, peace building, collaborative problem solving work for close to 25 years. And you asked me about the South Pole crew. So that's one of my more interesting clients. I'm now in the 10th year of preparing South Pole winter over crew members for South Pole Station. So Antarctica, big continent. Well, the geographic South Pole is 800 miles inland. And during the winter there, which is February through November, the crew members, usually around 40 to 45 people, are completely 100% isolated. It's 100 degrees below zero outside. There's no planes that can come and go. They are stuck. And what I love about it is that they are also a microcosm of society. You have all sorts of different people from all over they're mostly Americans, but you have some grantees from universities in other countries sometimes. But you've got your astrophysicist who's exploring the origins of the universe, and a doctor, and then you've got a plumber and a heavy equipment operator and a cook. And then you've got, your IT specialist and within these different job functions, you also get so many different personalities. And I just love the process of helping them prepare to work well together. Because one thing when it comes to conflict, you cannot do at the South Pole is avoid. Mm-hmm. You and I might not be getting along and we could just look the other way. But if you're in a small, closed environment, you've got to work together. If there's an issue, you've got to find a way to deal with it and get past it. You cannot avoid for 9 months. And so that's probably one of my most interesting clients. I also just recently wrapped up the 18th year in a row of leading the Leadership Academy for the Society of Nuclear Medicine. It's a professional society of nuclear medicine technologists. And I've been absolutely honored to be able to help in their leadership journey, which has turned into basically alumni of this program becoming elected members within their professional organization. And then I'll do, nonprofit board retreats. I'll do, I'll work with tech companies, with pharmaceutical. I'll work with anybody, frankly, as long as the goal is to help people learn how to get along more effectively. And so that's that.
So what's one of the first things you do when you meet with a group of people?
Well, it depends on the goal. If it's kind of an open enrollment thing where people don't know each other and they're just coming to get skills, that might be a little bit different. If it's an intact group that has to ultimately work together, like with the South Pole crew, I'm doing a variety of icebreakers but really it's a series of collaborative problem solving challenges. So I will do, now with them, I do a pre-deployment training in Colorado that goes on for several days. And it's a blend of, classroom stuff. I might do a teach piece on conflict styles, but then we'll do an activity where they have to actually solve a problem together. And, we'll kind of bounce back and forth between what I will call discovery versus practice exercises. Discovery exercise is where you just kind of throw them into something and see how it goes. And then you reflect on it and learn and figure out what worked, what didn't work. Okay, now here's some tips on effective communication. Take that into account. Now let's do another activity. And so there's this process of improving skills development for sure. But then by virtue of how we're doing it, it's positive, it's a shared experience, it's very memorable. They're also encoding these important lessons that will come in later. Most new groups that come together for a purpose of a common goal will initially show up getting along very well. And so it might not make sense to be talking about conflict. They might think, oh, we don't have conflict. We don't have to worry about that. But what I need to do is prepare them for when the conflict will inevitably arise later. And so positive, memorable, shared experiences that build on lessons that allow you to practice important skills around feedback, just various communication skills, but certainly collaborative problem solving kind of as an umbrella. And but if I have 2 hours, that would be different than if I have 2 days or 2 weeks. So it really just depends on the goals of the group and the context that we're in.
You have to be very flexible and know a lot of skills so you can apply them in a lot of different situations. That comes with all that experience that you have and the knowledge and the education. And you're goal driven and you're learning as you go.
Always learning. That's the thing about this kind of work is it's never boring, ever. I can do the same activity with 10 different groups and have 10 different experiences. And yes, I know what the goal is, but even groups of people where there's a returner, South Pole crew, for example, there's some people that have come back multiple years. And so I'll be doing a particular problem solving challenge with them, and someone will have already done it before, but they didn't do it with this particular group of people. And so it's a new experience every time. And it's new for me too. So so much of my work is about observing and modifying. It's not cookie cutter. For people who want a detailed agenda minute by minute, I probably really drive them crazy because that's not the way I operate, but I am extremely focused on what the objectives are. Okay, so I want to make sure we address crisis communication. I want to make sure we address effective feedback given and receiving. I want to make sure we address, conflict resolution, various skills. But how we get there might depend. It's like this particular theme is kind of naturally coming up right now. I'm going to go with it. So there's almost a bit of improv that goes with this. It's very exciting, very interesting, never boring.
I'm wondering, they say a teacher affects eternity because they never know when their influence stops. How does it feel when you see people getting them?
Well, I'll give you an example. A few years ago, we had a reunion with some of the alumni of the Society of Nuclear Medicine leaders. And it was a 10-year reunion of folks that had been through this leadership academy 10 years ago. And I don't often get that opportunity to meet with people who I worked with so long ago. And so I was really excited to, someone came up and said, "Oh, it's great to see you, Shawn. I still remember the workshop we did." So instead of me saying, "Oh, that's great," I said, "Oh, what do you remember?" And they said, "Oh, I remember that activity where, we had these loops of string around our fingers and we had to get untangled." And I said, "Okay, that's great. But what lesson do you remember from that?" And all of a sudden they're going off and like, "Well, I learned that we need to really observe everything carefully and not make assumptions. And when we feel stuck, to believe that there's another way forward. And sometimes you need to ask people around you for what they see." And I'm like, wow. That was really touching. Another example, when I was working with when I was working with the Israelis and Palestinians, there was one very, very challenging experience that we had one time in Croatia, where it's a bit of a long story, but the short story is we got hit with a massive storm that we did not expect. About half the group wanted to just ditch it and evacuate and go home immediately. And the other half wanted to stick with it. So we had a classic conflict there. Well, I applied collaborative problem solving 101, and I was entrusted to facilitate this conversation about what we do. And by the end of it, I started off by saying, "Look, I'm going to do my very best to make sure everyone's needs are met. But what is it you need?" One person stood up and said, "Shawn, thanks for everything, but you must evacuate us now. Get us out of here." I said, "Okay, what will that do for you? What do you need?" And he said, "Well, it's dangerous. We're not ready for this." And I said, "So you need to feel safe. Is that right?" Said, "Well, yeah." And, someone else stood up and said, "Shawn, this is great, but look, you need to evacuate us, get us out of here." And I said, "Okay, great, but what would that do for you?" And he said, "Well, we're wet, we're cold." So I said, "Oh, you need to be warm and dry." Is that right? Mm-hmm. And this goes on a bit. Then someone else stands up and says, "Hey, why do they get to dictate everything? I think we should stay." And I said, "Okay, well, what would that do for you?" And he said, "Well, I think we should, finish the goal that we set out to accomplish." So everybody gets a chance to speak, and then I reframe the problem for them all. And I said, "Look, I don't know what the answer is, but does anyone have an idea of how we can make sure we're able to finish what we started, but feel safe and warm and dry?" And spontaneously, people started taking out extra clothes and handing them to each other. And it was almost laughable because it's like, well, why didn't you share that extra rain gear like an hour ago? But, we agreed to ultimately make it through the night and revisit this conversation in the morning. And in the morning, we looked at a map and discovered that this emergency shelter that we had just somehow accidentally found, turns out there were many of them throughout the mountains in Croatia. And we just simply retooled the itinerary. Instead of going here, we went such that there would always be an emergency shelter within walking distance. And we finished the expedition. It was a huge success. And that was, I believe, in 2012. So 15 years ago. And just a couple years ago, I was in the region meeting with a bunch of these folks, and some of whom were on that trip. And I asked them, "What do you remember?"
Mm-hmm.
And this one rabbi with kind of a gleam in his eye, he said, "I remember there's what I want and there's what I need."
Mm-hmm.
And others, reflected on it, and I know in my heart that experience will stick with these people for the rest of their lives. And so I'm very honored to have a part in that. Now, again, looking at the big picture, there's horrible, horrible, horrible atrocities going on in Gaza right now. It doesn't matter what side you're on. If you care about humanity, you have to realize that what's going on there is just horrible and unconscionable. And it's sad to me that, it's happening. And we have people who are in charge who are not leaders for the whole, who are not leading collaboratively. So on one hand, and this is a very long-winded answer to your question, but on one hand, yes, I'm very touched. I feel that I've made a difference in some lives, but I'm not done yet. I want to make sure we're doing everything we can. It's not about me doing something. Put it this way. There are a lot of people out there who can do what I do a lot better than I do. Maybe I'm just the one crazy enough to try to do things like run for politics with it. So who knows? Maybe that'll spark someone else who does it even better. But I know that this is who I am, and it's what I'll be doing until the day I die.
Thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you, Laura. Thanks for doing this, for making a platform for this type of thing, and such an honor to be here. If anyone out there wants to connect in any way, I think you can share my contact info. I've got a pretty basic website. It's ShawnMDunning.com. I'd love to collaborate with anyone who also shares this type of vision, and who knows what we might accomplish together.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Your time is your energy is valuable. Invest them in tension. Intent on Purpose podcast with host Laura Hansen Breksa. Listen, learn, lead with intention. Your time is finite. Your energy is valuable. Your talents are unique. Invest them intentionally. If a story moved you, if a lesson helped you grow, subscribe, share, like, comment. Help more purpose-driven people know. Your is finite. Your energy is valuable. Your talents are unique. Invest them intentionally. Intent on purpose with Laura.